Table Talk is not your typical D&D TTRPG podcast. We are not here to run you through our whole campaign.
We're here to talk about everything else in the space of tabletop roleplay.
I'm your host, Alejandra Wilhelm.
And I'm also your host, Mariah Gresham.
And we're your tabletop roleplay girlies. Alrighty, and we are live back at it with your favorite roleplay podcast girlies. Welcome back to this episode. So we are actually going to talk a little bit about dead characters and how to resurrect them. To preface, I apologize. I'm a little sick. So if my voice sounds a little wonky, I'm so sorry. I'm very near death myself.
The intrusive thought that I just had to play Sarah McLachlan softly through the. I might do it.
The angels.
Yeah, I might do it. We'll see.
I mean, literally, I was on Saturday, just woke up like death itself. My mother was very concerned for me because I just was a goblin exiting my cave, and sounded like one, but. Yeah, so we are going to get into a bit about character deaths and how to handle it, in the best way, in the most story honoring way, I would say. And everybody's got different rules about character death and things like that. And also what role should resurrection play into that? If that character is going to come back and how to do it in an equally satisfying way. Let's start with, do you have any particular? I know you have plenty of thoughts about death relating your characters.
I do. Does every or almost every D&D character I play have some
death thematic?
Yeah. Surrounding them? Yes. Am I going to expand on that? Or no, that's for therapy and therapy alone. And my inside brain has an academic background in psychology. So I love that I said my inside brain.
Yeah, as if there is an outside brain.
The part of my brain that's just in Baldur's Gate, where it's the small brain that just has this. It's there's one of those, which there might be. Who's to say?
The little brains are the inside brain, and then the absolute is the outside brain.
Yes,
the big brain.
Anyway, so yeah, I think as far as obviously I've talked a fair bit about Anya, my character that I play in your Strixhaven game, and she's a reborn, sort of. She was killed, she was resurrected, but it was kind of a botched job, so she doesn't have all of the benefits or all of the downsides of being a reborn. And then I think the only other character that I really had that we didn't end up getting to play, so two of them for the Ravenloft campaign, we never ended up getting to play this out. But early in our Ravenloft campaign, I started playing with Eva, my monk, and early on, I was kind of just I don't know. I wanted to play her as this really bubblegum pink, happy-go-lucky character, kind of just to be an asshole and spit in the face of this grimdark setting that the DM was trying to be. I'm gonna be the bubbliest bitch in the West. You've seen nothing.
She's gonna be a big doe-eyed country monk.
Yeah, that lasted all of 2 seconds with my melodramatic ass. And so pretty early into that campaign, maybe, I don't know, 6 or so sessions in, so a couple months in, I sat with the DM and I pitched, what if one of the dreadlord that was the pirate dreadlord that was coded for me and my proclivities, killed Eva. And then I had my other character, Neris, who is the character I play in our Baldur's Gate, Forbidden Baldur's Gate run through. Where we're
the bad girls
on
club.
Our evil fuck shit. Where you fucking told me to kill Karlach and then I did it and then you shamed me. Or you looked really guilty. And I was like, you put this in my mind. You said that we can't have Karlach, and now I have her head in my inventory. This is we're far past the point.
Far past the point of
Pull
regret.
that back. But that's off topic. I was gonna have Nerys, who is a full reborn. Anya ended up being a reborn because I liked a lot of those themes that I had wanted to play with Nerys, but I just needed a different take on it. But Nerys had been resurrected by Strahd, and Nerys was Strahd's creature, and she would have been his agent, and so she was a Gloomstalker Ranger, and then she had a level in like a Haunted One Warlock, with Strahd as her patron. And so he could see through her eyes, he could do all kinds of fun stuff, and it was going to be an interesting thing to see how it played out. Like, did she betray the party to Strahd? Did she try to, like, sever that Warlock pact bond? Like, what all happened there? But it was interesting. After we kind of decided that we were going to do that lead up to what would have been Eva's death, which I think we were only like a couple sessions away from. And like, I think it's similar to you with Cadence too. Like, after you knew that Cadence was going to,
be killed,
go into that long night,
cross the rainbow bridge.
Yeah. Rage Against the Dying of the Light. You like had a lot more fun with her, and you really got a lot more attached to her. And I definitely had the same thing happen with Eva, where I was like, oh, this is gonna hurt when this character dies. But it's a really interesting thing, and I think the role that death plays in campaigns really varies table to table. Because like, if it's a campaign where we're just here to like, kill mimics and get treasure and buy ale, then no one really needs to die, right? But if it's a darker campaign, like, I know I've had discussions with certainly you and Bex, and it's very forthcoming with Alyssa with our Vampire the Masquerade campaign. I'm like, there are things that you've pitched to me as ideas where I'm like, I love that, and I think it's chaotic and dope. But if you get caught and it comes out, the punishment for that will be the final death.
Yeah.
And I need you to know that is the stakes, because this is a campaign where, like, this is not, we're not heroes here. This is all fucked up shit. And this is a campaign where death is a possibility. And I'm not setting out to kill you. Yeah, but it's like, if I start rolling dice for these fucking demigod elder vampires, somebody might not make it.
Yeah. Fully. And I think, I think what you mentioned, two parts here. Both the part of, and we've talked about, like, it is okay if you are no longer comfortable playing a certain character. It is okay. And like, you're feeling self-conscious about, like, intruding on other people's fun or whatever. Like, if you do not want to play a certain character anymore, you can work with your DM to write them out and stuff, and whatever. If they just like take a long walk into the forest and never come back, that's fine. If you want them to have like a big dramatic send-off death, as some of us did, not looking at myself or any other reflective surfaces of this moment, but the role that death plays in the theme of the campaign that you're playing in, it's a good element, I think, to sit down with your players and set the tone for the kind of, theme or campaign that you're in, and having them understand how like severe the consequences might be. So like, for example, when we first started Strixhaven, we had 2 players initially who were brand baby spanking new to D&D, right? And so we chose the Strixhaven setting because it was like, very lighthearted, very fun, and very safe. So like, I
Remember that?
Remember that?
Remember when it was that for like 2 fucking sessions?
Yeah, and so like I had, we had our session 0 as you should always do. And I made sure to preface, I'm like, "Hey, so long as you're inside of Strixhaven, it's a magic school with plenty of powerful instructors and staff. You're not really going to run into risk of death while you're at school. If you decide to fuck off and like go into the city and do something dumb, or God forbid you leave the city of Trodane entirely and go try to enter like the big world, you're leaving the starting island on fucking Breath of the Wild type shit.
Yeah.
Then
That's on
then
you.
God be with you. But as far as like, the major shit that was going on in Strixhaven, I did not originally intend for anybody to have any character deaths there, unplanned. And so I made sure to preface that because I wanted to make sure they were feeling safe to just like have fun, explore, get the handle on it. And whenever y'all graduated and they'd been playing for a while, at that point I would be ready to like send you off into a world of consequences.
Yeah, then we can up the risk.
Yeah. Then those players left because life gets in the way sometimes, and we love them and
Yep.
and all of that. And then they left, and I was left with my 3 experienced players. And I was like,
Yes.
we had another sit down chat where I was like, "Hey girls, we're taking a whole different take on this because now it's my veterans sitting at the table.
Yes.
Now it's the girls that I know live for that dramatic ass shit, and it's gonna get a little dark. And
we're getting into like the depths of my character's arc, which was already quite dark, and it was just like how like death was a very central thing. It was just sort of how graphic is it gonna be, and how graphic was that we made a patchwork quilt of her parents' corpses that also had a plant in it,
a taste,
which whew,
yeah.
yeah.
But
still one of the just more wild, I think that is the wildest moment I've ever experienced it, and I knew it was coming, but me, Mariah, and my character, neither of us are prepared for that.
I'm very
fully.
satisfied with that feeling. As a DM, I now understand so much about other DMs in that moment.
I'm gonna get your ass back in the Vampire the Masquerade campaign.
You will. I know you will, and I'm looking forward to every second of it. But yeah, it's having those conversations with your players that kind of sets the tone of like, hey, the fuck around and find out setting is turned on at the moment. And understanding that. And I think, for example, like in our horror campaign, our Western horror, that's like even cranked more because Teddy's really like it.
For sure.
Teddy's really taken on that like antagonistic DM, mantle, but not in a way that's like toxic, in a way that's like
in a fun
yeah,
way.
in a way that it's got the same vibe of like playing a fucking Elden Ring game where I'm like, the game is made to kill me at every corner. And surviving is the win here. And so every combat encounter we enter, we are turned on max. We are all like pulling out our best moves, using our best tactics. Like I've never
you're like, here, let me shotgun a Dr. Pepper.
Yeah.
And like
and big brain strat this whole map
because I'm gonna need it.
Yeah. But it's so fun, and like and it's because he's put such high stakes there. And he makes us fucking feel it every single second. And he does it in a really good way. But having that element of character death like makes things impactful. And of course you're trying to prevent it at every corner, but should it happen, I think having those conversations where you've prefaced, you understand that this is going to happen, that way, like if you're taking a big swing and you're like, okay, if the roll comes out bad, you know what this means. And like giving the player that moment to like separate from the character, I think is important, and understand that like, okay, whatever happens next, it could mean life or death for this character. I could be saying goodbye in this next role. And
for sure,
I think that's really, really important to like handle the character death properly, is like both setting expectations at the beginning, and then when you, the DM, recognize that you're entering a high risk moment with a player. I think like, Brennan, for example, and Abria and like Matt Mercer all do this really well. of where they set the expectation for that one role. And those one roles are the ones that like make you so excited to play the game because you're like, oh, the stakes are high. It's got like that gambler's rush. And you're like, I need this to go well. And if it doesn't, you're like, oh, it's like the highs and the lows, right? And having that brief moment before that role where you're setting the expectation, the player knows what's at stake and has come to acceptance with either result, because it really is up to chance at that point, I think is like key to handling that in a good way that will work both story-wise as well as like the dynamics that are handled there at the table and the player itself.
For sure. And it's like, because there's two different ways. I think either can be good and there's not like a worse one and a better one, but there's like planned character deaths where it's like for whatever reason we've orchestrated this, or there's where you set the expectation in advance, or it's like, okay, this might lead to a character death, so it's like maybe you have people like make a backup character, right? And then there's those moments in game where things just go irrevocably tits up. And it's like, oh no, I was not emotionally prepared for this character to die, and they very well might. Like I have that in the famous Chimera fight with Eva, where like weirdly I had made my peace with like this character's gonna die, but I knew roughly how she was gonna die, and so I liked a lot of that story, and it's like, but at that point, like none of that had been set up. Like we weren't in the right domain, whatever, and we just get in this fight, and Eva's a monk, so it's like she's a tank, and so she's in there, locked in, swinging, and my rolls were awful, and it got to the point where like the DM looked at me and it was after she'd already been set on fire like a couple times, like it was a mess, and like she was unconscious, I believe, and the DM looked at me and he's like, I'm gonna roll open on the table, and it's like, if it's below a 10, the dragon head of the Chimera is going to eat her. And at that point, I was so emotionally checked out from the moment that I was like, well, fuck, I guess that's what's happening. Because it had just like everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And it's like, oh fuck. And then like, yeah, he rolled like a 14 or something. So she didn't get fucking eaten. But that was like, that's a very different feeling. Than dealing with like a planned death. And like you can contrast that with like Anya's fight early on with the corpse flower, of like that was stressful because it was going really poorly, and like a beloved NPC had come with me, and like it was just me and that NPC, and so like it was stressful, but I knew that you weren't going to kill Anya in that scene.
Oh yeah, I was not. I had my plans.
I knew kind of in my heart that I was like, we've done so much work on this character, and there's so much build up and there's so much good stuff we're just getting into, of like, this is not going to be where she dies. Like it might go really poorly. She might lose a limb, lose an eye, something. And that's something we had talked about before. It's like, if you fully fuck around and find out, there might be a consequence that isn't death, but is like, you have some sort of permanent physical scarring. And like that I could make my peace with, but I wasn't worried like I was with Eva, where I was like, oh, I might fully lose this character right now, and then all the work that I've done is for nothing. Because they're just gonna die a meaningless death. That's stressful. And then like, but comparing that with like Teddy's campaign, where because Teddy's campaign is so combat focused, where it's like I have some background for like Maeve, my monk, but it's nothing remotely close.
You're not crazy
to
invested.
What like we've built. No. And so it's more like Maeve is like, as a character, is generally just very chaotic, and she wants to like say her, flip prayers, make her blood sacrifices, collect her bones, and just out here to vibe and hit things. And so like, no, I don't want her to die. I'm having a lot of fun playing her, but I'm not so emotionally tied up in her that if she died,
Mhm.
it would like wreck me, the person. And that I think is important for for a campaign that is so combat focused, because that lets me take more risks or do more things that like might be kind of helter skelter and crazy, because I'm like, well, I'm prepared. I have a different mindset
Yeah.
in that campaign.
Yeah, I think in that campaign in particular, again, it goes back to the like you've set expectations. I set expectations in my campaign where I'm like, death is a possibility, but like when it's probably most thematically like proper, right? Like I wasn't gonna kill you before any big reveal. If the final battle had gone tits up, maybe. Like at that point we gotta honor it.
Maybe.
But
And at that point, for Anya's character, like if she had died in that same fight in which like what we remained of her parents had died, like that, I mean, for her as a character, she would probably had more peace with that than being where she is now, where she's just
yeah.
left having had to be the one to deliver that final blow. So it's like that would have been in line with the character work we've done.
Exactly.
on
And like
her. So it would have been
I
fun.
want your characters. I think like for me it's kind of like it's that mechanic in Strixhaven specifically. It's for that mechanic in video games sometimes where you enter a zone where you're like, "Oh, I can't save." And like
Yeah.
what happens here happens kind of shit. Like
It's that point in like Resident Evil 8 where you're in that like intro village where all the wolves are,
mhm,
and it just tells you to run,
yeah.
and you've like not gotten all the commands yet, and you're like, that's not what I want to see.
Yeah.
But I don't have another option.
Yeah. So I think for like in our specific campaign, that's kind of how I handle it. In that, like, I have a lot of story shit that I have to set up for each of your characters before y'all get to those danger zones. And I think in the danger
For
zones
sure.
of your like the highest points of your arc are really where your character's most at risk. Because
Yeah.
at that point, that's when like the guardrails kind of come off, and I'm like, what happens in this fight is gonna happen. Um,
Right.
but then I do want y'all obviously to make it to graduation. And then my
For sure.
plans
Yeah.
are like once you're graduated, you're full blown adventurers and you don't have mommy and daddy and your legal guardians or whoever's watching over
Your
you anymore.
godparents and like
You
yeah.
don't have your big bad like max level nepo baby privilege
No.
anymore. You are out in the big world, and the big world has claws and teeth and things that lurk in the dark. So
For
what
sure.
happens?
It's a very different campaign after we graduate,
Yeah.
which I really like. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
That build up is going to be really
And
fun.
it's reflective of like, y'all are still like, I think you're level 3 now. And
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah. So like,
Yes, we are 3 because Anya just took her oath.
exactly. So you guys are level 3. So I'm like, I want the danger level to reflect that same level that you guys are as characters. And obviously like the closer we get to like end of graduation, you're going to be going on some like actual adventures and stuff. So that might be a little bit more dangerous, but I'm adapting it accordingly. And things like that. But like, I think I emphasize when you guys are entering those zones of, hey, this is high risk. Like y'all could die.
Mhm.
And like we're in that
Yeah.
red map area.
Yeah, like when we were breaking into Lisette's office to try to like find that, pulling back the bookcase or in that whole like investigation period where it's like I think you and I were probably the only ones that fully had a grasp on that because nobody else really knew the like how
bad it was about
Anya's
to be,
stuff
yeah.
was until that session. Like you had even made a comment of like if that had gotten fucked up and for some reason like Vex's character Callista had just like busted in there and tried to just like, Nepo baby strong arm her way into being like, tell me the truth. Like you probably would have had Lisette just capture Callista and either kill her and try to resurrect her, or she would have just been in that room with like all the dead bodies, right?
Yeah.
Waiting to be worked on.
I think y'all entered the red zone as soon as like that conversation started to turn with Lisette. I was like, oh, she's in danger.
Yes. And so like we thankfully had the sense to move quite quickly after that. We didn't like really sleep on it or anything.
Yeah.
Just kind of just kept it trucking. But yeah, that could have gone quite poorly
Mhm.
for sure. And I think it's similar for me with vampires because like I'm not setting out to kill your characters in any way either. I think I just wanted to set the expectation because like in the episode last week that we just had go out with Ryan from Run DMG where we talked all things like Vampire the Masquerade and kind of compared that to D&D is like there's a thing with D&D of like your first and best option, right, is to just come in swinging and try to outmuscle and outfight and immediately go to combat and all of that. And vampires is not that, and White Wolf games are not that. They're a very different tone, and I wanted to make that clear. So it's like I didn't want you turning up to a situation like court or so where you're told to hunt down a more senior vampire or whatever,
Mm.
and you think, oh, if somebody mouths off to me, I'll just pull out my longsword and hack at them because like you can do that, but if you do, you're probably not going to come out of it because this person's so much stronger than you.
Yeah.
So it's more so for me, it wasn't like, oh, I'm setting out to like kill the characters or a threat or anything like that. It's just a tone setting for like the gravity.
Yeah,
of
because I think when,
things.
especially in VTM, when you're playing like Camarilla vampire court stuff, you just have to understand that like you have a role to play and you have to play it smart. It's much more intrigue and things like that. And
The social hierarchy is a much
yeah,
bigger
rather
deal.
than come in here
Um,
like big dick swinging like some Viking women that I certainly won't reference.
Yeah, because
but
you're not going to be the biggest dick in the room, unfortunately.
yeah, I was like, she has that energy, but
So-
then we were like, okay,
She
we
does.
reconciled it with the person that helped her like come back out of torpor was like, hey, we're gonna spend a year teaching you etiquette.
She's like, hey, what you're not going to do is fucking ruin my reputation
Yeah.
as well. Like, we're going to put some training wheels on. Well, because there was a bit where, like, you pitched the, like, unhinged idea of having Revna, like, kill an elk or something and bring it into court.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, Prince Anne is a Ventrue. So Prince Anne's not going to eat that elk. And I'm like, I don't know how that's going to be received. And how it's going to be coming from Revna, who is responsible for like the mass atrocity of Roanoke and like everything of like Anne's relationship to Riley and Revna's relationship to Riley. And I'm like, there's a lot going on. So I'm like, that might go quite poorly. That might be like
that might get me killed day one.
Maybe. And I'm like, I wouldn't have like killed you necessarily, but like you might go back into torpor. and have to get, I mean, you can get pulled back out. They'll just like pull a stake out and feed you a little bit. But like it take out your pocket varmint and just sort of squeeze it over your mouth. It would have been fine. But like I think I told like I'll roll for it of like I'll just
see what happens.
Similar to D&D. It's like I'll put an over under number in my head and that will be how she reacts. And like you ended up having Revna like make a painting and do that, which is much more sort of Ventrue appropriate.
Yeah.
So it went over quite well.
And it was funny because like really the deciding factor between the two was you telling me I didn't have that much time between that moment and when the party was happening or whatever. So I was like, she doesn't really have time to go hunt a whole elk and then still look good by the time she's back in court.
Yeah.
So
you're in London, so it's like you have to.
I would have had to go trek the fuck out, into the country or something.
Right.
And I was like, there's not enough time, even though she is very fast. I don't think there's enough time for her to like either she would have come back smelling like Hunt, or
like a kid that's been on the playground.
Yeah, or she can show up looking cute. If I could have looked cute and still had the elk, I would have done it. Like that's really the only thing that saved us from that moment.
Well, there's still opportunities for you to like. You'll probably have full excursions. Bax's character,
I'm gonna get mine
out
for
in the country.
sure.
Like there'll be time for an elk hunt. I would actually I would love to roleplay that. That'd be hilarious with the three of you. But like there was definitely a moment when you had Rebna walk in where in my head I'm like, is there an elk over this bitch's shoulders? And she's just not narrating it yet. And then like it took me a bit because I'm like, where is it? Where's the elk corpse? When's it coming? And then you were like, oh, she has the painting. And I'm like, okay, cool. Then there's no, I mean, is there a corpse and a painting? I'm like, no, just painting.
Just
Okay,
painting,
great.
just painting.
It's a magic painting that's a portal, a bag of holding that's holding the elk corpse. Like where is it?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, that would have been rather unfortunate if my girl had gotten conked on day one.
No, she wouldn't have gotten conked. Like there's no fun in that, and there's too much fun stuff I have like planned and that I want to do.
Yeah.
But it definitely would have put her behind the 8 ball as far as like relations with anyone at court, right? Which like even though like none of you really care for the people that are currently ruling London, you still, you don't necessarily want them to know that, right?
Yeah.
So it would have put more of a target on your back when there is already a target on your back.
Yeah. And that's another thing to mention, I think, like when you as the
bring an elk to Mithras.
Bring an elk to Mithras,
Yeah.
he'll appreciate it.
Probably. I feel like he would.
All right, sick. I'll take a note of that. I was gonna say like that is another thing to mention is like when you the DM are not like prepared for a character death, and like kind of you mentioned when shit's going tits up and like the momentary panic that you have behind that screen and you're like and like also like the guilt because like ideally I hope you don't genuinely want to kill your characters. Like Teddy jokes about it, but he loves our characters and he doesn't actually want them to die, but he's just gonna let the dice die and do their thing.
If Teddy wanted our characters to die, he wouldn't have given us his like Warwick, his DMPC.
Yeah.
That like 1v1's the baddest motherfucker enemy that's on the field.
Yeah. Or like our 1,000,001 random homebrew fail saves that we have.
Yeah. No.
And things like that because as just like last resort shit. Like I think about like what I mentioned before with like Val and stuff and like that was a situation that went tits up because we like as dummies party split and it was really the dice were just not in my favor and it was certainly not a moment he had planned and I was like in resolute like, hey, I've been rolling so bad, I'm so defeated. I'm like, if she goes, I guess she goes. And then he's like, no. But he was like, no, we have worked too fucking hard. And he was panicking as much as I was. But
yeah, he's literally just roll it again. He's like, if you can get a 3, I'll let it
yeah, he was really trying to give me every fucking
just don't roll a 1.
Every chance possible. And my dice were like, what if you get fucked, my guy?
Yeah, pretty much.
But no, yeah, and like those moments, I genuinely do fear the day because I love y'all's characters so much, and I've done so much work for like each of your stories and stuff, and especially as like I'm leaning up into each one of them, I do more, and like
they're interweaving now, and like even
it's so good.
All of Anya and Callista's shit, and like Anya and like her ex's shit that is in Callista's brother. And it's like there's so much good stuff that I'm like, I need it. They can't die.
Yeah. Have you ever had a character resurrect?
Be resurrected or do the resurrecting?
Be resurrected. Or both.
I'm trying to think. 'Cause I don't know that I've ever had to have a character be resurrected like in table in canon. Like I definitely had like plotted stuff for like Mayrus, the like super high level cleric and psionic rogue that I played in the OP server. Like she definitely had been resurrected in her past and had tried and failed to resurrect people, but it's never happened in
like
game.
organically in
I don't
game,
believe.
Gotcha.
No.
I'm trying to think. Like, I don't think
Have you?
I have either. I don't think I've ever played a campaign long enough to really have that like full circle come back around. I've definitely had
That's me too.
yeah, I've definitely had character deaths, obviously. But I'm trying to think of it from the perspective of like as a DM. Um, if like I had a character death, how would I kind of handle the possibility, right, of resurrection? And I think most people would agree that like obviously resurrection, like a true resurrection, I mean even the spell I think is pretty demanding in like the qualifications. Like you have to have like a diamond that's worth so much or whatever.
Yeah, it's for like 10,000 gold or whatever.
Yeah.
And or maybe that's probably the wrong number. Don't quote me on that. But like, yeah, and there's like it's a spell and you have to roll for it, and like the soul has to be willing,
Yeah.
and like they each I know they've done that a lot in like Critical Role where they each do something or say something or whatever to try to like aid
Lower
the
lower the
resurrection.
DC of the resurrection.
Uh-huh. And like it's a very and I love that
Yeah. That's a really
in
cool
table
mechanic to include in that.
because it really sets the stage for like how important the thing you're trying to do is. Like my favorite example is probably and like people either who have listened to Vox Machina or seen the animated series. If you haven't, please go watch it. It's so good. But the moment where they're going after the first vestige, and it was actually a Deathwalker's ward was actually supposed to be Percy's vestige of diversion, not Vax's. But then like Vex goes to open that casket, and it like the trap goes off and it kills her. And then in that resurrection spell, when they're trying to revive her, Vax has that moment, that like take me instead, you raven bitch moment, where he offers himself in Vex's place to the Raven Queen. Because the Raven Queen, I took a lot of inspiration from McCall Anya's deity that we homebrewed with Kalimvor and the Raven Queen from Critical Role. Because like she is an entity that governs over the sanctity of death and the process of death. And it's like once you die, you belong to her. And she is loath to release souls. And so Vax offered himself in Vex's place. And like all of the everything that comes from that, you don't know yet unless you've listened to the whole campaign. But there's so many little moments of like when the Raven Queen cut that thread that was between Vex and Vax and bound Vax to herself, and like that's probably my favorite, both in the animated series and then also in the game, resurrection moment, because it's just so poetic and so good and so true to their characters, and the stakes and the outcome for that were so massive and earth-shattering for all of those characters, and they have had no idea really what that meant at that point.
Yeah. And
it doesn't fully come out until much later.
It has to be huge. Like,
yeah.
Because, you know, we can't do that in real life. So
no,
in a world of endless magical possibilities, there has to be an element of like, it has to be difficult. It has to require so much. I think I did that a lot with like Lisette's stuff, because like her whole thing was that she was doing all these reborn experiments because her lover was the previous champion to your death god. And so his soul was not anyone else's but that god's. And so he could not be.
And his soul didn't want to return.
His soul didn't want to return, but it also doesn't belong to him anymore.
No.
And,
nope.
You know, like the wording specifically was also, it was like either the soul has to be willing or it's being held back by something like a higher power. And for me, it was both, you know. But
for sure.
And her motivation was so much like, I want to break the natural laws of magic to bring him back. And she was going to any length, and it was obviously like to horrific lengths to try to achieve that goal. And you know, she's the most powerful healer like in the canon of that like at least the continent. And she could not achieve it.
So like it's the hubris.
It's the hubris.
Yeah.
And so it has to be like an astronomical cost. It has to mean something. And so I think like if you're gonna play around with resurrection of a previous character death, you know, it's still achievable, but like you as the DM should make that have a weight. Like you want this character back so bad, it's gonna cost somebody or all of you very dearly.
Yeah, I agree. Like,
because if you're gonna play around with fate, baby, that's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot to to do.
Yeah, it's a big thing, and I think it is. There's some things where like, Baldur's Gate is another example of like, yeah, like that's a video game. So yeah, I like that we can just pop a resurrection scroll. And,
I could just talk to Withers real
yeah,
quick and be like, I want my boyfriend back.
Pay Withers $200 to like bring my pretty boyfriend, my pretty vampire boyfriend back, who always goes down like a stone in combat because he is a rogue and doesn't have a ton of HP. But at a table game, I think it doesn't. I don't like it to be that.
Yeah.
Unless it's a game where it is just very casual and funny,
Yeah.
and then like if it's that,
it's for the
people
goose.
probably aren't dying, right?
Then yeah, like you know, burn one of your favorite socks and your homegirl comes back.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing too. I think that was the episode with like Dan Tom where he talked about like, you know, you sacrifice. No, that was like sacrifice an item or something to get a spell slot or whatever. But I also like that as an idea potentially to aid in a resurrection spell as well.
Yeah, that would be cool.
But then also sometimes like you don't have a cleric. Like not all parties have a cleric. And I think you have, I believe it's like an hour after the souls left the body to perform that resurrection ritual, or it's done, like tethered forever, and like that's the tether is severed and they cannot come back. So yeah, if you're out in like the boonies and you don't have a cleric, then Boblin the Goblin ain't coming back.
Boblin the Goblin ain't coming back. Yeah, it's like it's the same as being out in the boonies and it's gonna fucking take over an hour for an ambulance to get there. Like, so sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Like in the general broad sense, I think the element of having character deaths at your table should be, you know, custom tailored, you know, understand the game that you are playing. And what role that's going to have there, set proper expectations with your players, both before the campaign and also in the moment when, you know, things are getting bad, whether it was planned or not. You know, make that moment mean something to the best of your ability, either, like, you know, through narration or down to that dice roll.
I just randomly have this thought, but I think like as the DM in that situation, especially if it's something where like, 'cause you brought this up earlier of like getting in a situation where the dice have just fucked you over and you've not prepared for this to be like a life and death encounter, and now it is. Like, I think it's fine. Of like, this is easier to do if you're playing in person, but like stop the game and then be like, okay, this character they've failed all their death saving throws. They are dead. And then pull that player aside into another room and be like, okay, your soul's left your body, so come and have a conversation with me. Or if you're on Zoom, like go into another, like a separate chat room or whatever. And like, if you need to have a check-in really quick of it's like, okay, how are you feeling? How are we doing with this? Like, are you good? Like, do you want to play this out? Do you want this to be the end of this character? Do you feel like this is a good ending for them? Or do you want like me to pull off some kind of like DM intervention? Because at the end of the day, like you're rolling behind a screen, like you have
the power.
You're guiding the story. You have the power to pull a character kind of back from the brink, and it like your players having fun and like not being traumatized unless they consented to that is always like the first priority.
For sure.
So I think it thematically makes sense because like for all the other party members, that's always tense when the DM like pulls one aside or like tells everybody else to leave to talk to
like,
one
what
person.
the fuck is happening?
And then and so like when someone has died and it's like, okay, you're gonna have a little conversation
with God.
with whatever's on the other side of the rainbow.
Mhm.
That could be a cool way if you're like, oh fuck, I didn't think this was gonna
Yeah,
happen.
I
Like
like
I
that.
did,
It could be an element of like both like a check-in of like, hey, what are you good? Do we want this to happen? Do we want to do something different? And then, if they're at peace with that death, you can also take that moment to really like kind of describe to them what happens to that character once they die. Like, who do they
for
see on
sure.
the other side? What do they experience and where do they go? And give them that like
Yeah.
personal, private moment of closure. Is like
Mhm.
really, yeah, like it would be like a really meaningful interaction, because it does suck because we put a lot of emotional effort into these characters. We put a lot of ourselves into
For
these
sure.
characters. So a character death should be handled with all the care of like, this was something important to you, and like we want to send it off properly in whatever fashion is gonna be the best way, whether we ordained this to happen or the dice just said fuck you and the horse you rode in on.
Mhm.
I'm gonna wipe this bitch
Literally,
out
yeah. Which
with a rat.
they have a tendency to do. Just a chonky
A
rat.
chonky, hefty rat, and one bad dice roll is all that keeps you from the mortal on the mortal coil. Yeah. But yeah, handle those character deaths with care, and then
Absolutely.
treat resurrection as importantly. I think depends on your campaign. If you want to do the funny haha goofs and you have a little withers that you just got to pay a couple bucks to and everybody is chilling, by all means. Or
Yeah.
use it as like a really powerful narrative tool. To really add weight to things and world build. But with
Yeah. And if it's a game where those forces are in play or you want them to be in play as a DM and your players have agreed to that, it can be a good moment to show that those stakes are higher
absolutely,
and put that into play.
yeah, 100%. Well, I think we are coming up on our time here for the episode. Thank you so much for joining us for this little chit chat about death and resurrection.
Welcome to a show about
We've been singing.
That's for everyone.
We've been singing so much this
Beetlejuice.
episode. Beautiful, but yeah.
Go listen to Beetlejuice.
Go listen to
That one's
Beetlejuice.
very good.
Hashtag sponsor. Definitely not sponsored. I wish.
Definitely. That'd be good. That'd be funny.
Absolutely. But thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. Remember that the game is never that serious, but it's also the thing we love the most. But thank you so much.
Yes.
Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Table Talk is a podcast brought to you by Mythos Media Productions, bringing you a new episode every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcast. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Table Talk RPG, or check us out at our website, mythosmediaproductions.godaddysite.com. All business inquiries can reach out to us via email at info@mythosmediaproductions.com.